The first time my own son asked me to pay $50 just to see my grandchildren, I honestly thought he was joking. He wasn't. From that day on, every visit came with a price tag. Miss a payment, and I didn't get to see Lily or Ethan. That's exactly where this story begins. It was a beautiful autumn morning, the kind that makes you believe nothing bad could possibly happen. I was driving my old pickup with a small bouquet of sunflowers on the passenger seat. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, loved sunflowers, and I figured bringing them along might make everyone smile. I was excited because I was finally going to spend a few hours with my grandchildren, maybe take them to the park and spoil them with ice cream. Ever since my wife passed away 5 years earlier, those two kids had become my whole world. They were the reason I kept moving, even on mornings when my back begged me to stay in bed. Like always, I had called my son Mark the night before. I never showed up without asking. I learned long ago that I wasn't welcome unless I had permission. Mark answered after a few rings, distracted as usual. "Hey, son," I said. "If you guys aren't busy tomorrow, I'd love to take Lily and Ethan out for a little while." He went quiet. I could hear Sarah speaking somewhere behind him before he finally sighed. "Yeah, that should be okay. But, Dad, don't forget the rule." My stomach tightened, but I forced myself to sound cheerful. "Don't worry, I've got it ready. The rule, $50 in cash, every single visit." About a year earlier, Sarah had calmly explained that my visits disrupted the household, changed the kids' routine, and created extra work. To make things fair, she said, they had decided to charge me an administrative fee every time I wanted to see my own grandchildren. I looked at Mark, waiting for him to tell me this was some kind of terrible joke. He never said a word. He just stared at the floor with his hands in his pockets. That's when I realized they meant every word. Pay the $50, or stop seeing Lily and Ethan. They called it healthy boundaries. I called it the most expensive heartbreak of my life. But when the only family you have left is waiting on the other side of that front door, pride becomes a luxury you can no longer afford. Lily and Ethan spotted me the second I stepped into the backyard. "Grandpa," they shouted, racing across the grass before wrapping their little arms around my legs. Just like that, the ache in my chest disappeared. For a little while, the $50 didn't matter. The humiliation didn't matter. We spent the afternoon laughing, chasing each other around the swing set, and seeing who could swing the highest. Those moments were worth more than anything money could buy. Later, while the kids sat on the patio eating snacks Sarah had brought outside, I stayed by the swings. Through the screen door, I could hear Mark and Sarah talking in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to listen, but one sentence stopped me cold. "I still can't believe those cabinets cost $40,000, Mark said. Sarah laughed. "I told you they'd be worth every penny. We'll make it all back when we sell the house." $40,000. The number hit me like a punch to the ribs. I had spent my entire career fixing broken boilers, leaky pipes, and worn-out machines, and my retirement savings weren't even close to that. Memories flooded back. The $10,000 I gave Mark for his first car. The rent money when he fell behind. The countless times I slipped him a few $100s because he was my son and I never wanted him to struggle. Then everything clicked into place. They could spend $40,000 remodeling a kitchen without blinking, but they still charged me $50 every time I wanted to hug my own grandchildren. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about what I was worth to them. In their world, a new quartz countertop was worth more than I was. 800 visits. That's what it came out to. 800 afternoons with Lily and Ethan, traded for polished stone and designer cabinets. My legs suddenly felt weak, and I lowered myself onto the swing before they gave out. The kids kept laughing, completely unaware that something inside me had just broken. I looked through the screen door and saw Mark lean over and kiss Sarah on the forehead. It was such a simple, loving gesture, but in that moment I stopped seeing him as a man caught in the middle. He wasn't trapped. He had chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. For an entire year, he had watched me hand over cash just to earn the privilege of being his children's grandfather, and he had never once told his wife, "This isn't right." I realized then that I hadn't just been paying $50. I'd been paying with my pride. Slowly, I walked into the kitchen. Mark glanced up from his phone. "Everything okay, Dad?" I searched his face for the little boy who used to ride on my shoulders, for the teenager I taught to drive, for the young man I helped move into his first apartment. He was gone. Standing in front of me was someone willing to put a price on his father's love. I think I'm going to head home, I said quietly. He frowned. Already? You just got here. I forced a smile. I'm not feeling too well. Don't want the kids catching anything. Sarah gave me a polite smile that never reached her eyes. Of course. Take care. I nodded, walked out the front door, and couldn't even bring myself to say goodbye to Lily and Ethan. I sat behind the wheel of my truck for several minutes, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. For the first time in my life, I wasn't driving away because the visit was over. I was driving away because I finally understood exactly what my place was in my own son's family. I walked into my house and dropped onto the couch without turning on a single light. The bouquet of sunflowers was still sitting on the passenger seat of my truck. I had forgotten to give it to Sarah, and for the first time, I was glad. She didn't deserve them. As the silence settled in around me, I kept replaying the afternoon over and over. My wife used to tell me I was too kind, that someday people would mistake my love for weakness. She had been right all along. I had spent years giving Mark everything I could, my time, my savings, my support, every ounce of love a father could offer. In return, I had become a $50 inconvenience. At first, I wasn't angry. I was heartbroken. It felt as if the only purpose I had left in life had been reduced to a cash transaction. But sometime after midnight, the sadness hardened into something else, determination. I realized I had two choices. I could keep paying to see my own grandchildren until my savings ran dry, or I could finally stop rewarding the people who had forgotten my worth. This wasn't about revenge. It was about making them understand what they had chosen to lose. I knew more about their lives than they realized. Mark's job looked impressive from the outside, but he'd admitted to me months earlier that layoffs were becoming a real possibility. Sarah loved the appearance of wealth, even more than wealth itself. New furniture, designer clothes, luxury vacations, expensive renovations. It all went onto credit cards. The $40,000 kitchen wasn't a celebration of success. It was another payment they could barely afford. I also saw the way they treated people. Sarah constantly leaned on her own elderly mother for free babysitting, yet never seemed grateful. They mocked their neighbors behind closed doors and measured people by what they owned instead of who they were. Worst of all, Lily and Ethan were growing up believing that expensive things mattered more than family. That was the moment I made my decision. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to beg. I was simply going to disappear. The next morning, I stopped calling. I stopped texting. I stopped leaving birthday reminders, funny voicemail messages, and weekend invitations. I vanished from their routine as quietly as I could. The first week nearly broke me. Every instinct told me to pick up the phone and ask how the kids were doing, but I stayed silent. A few days later, Mark texted, "Hey, Dad, haven't heard from you. Everything okay?" I ignored it. Another week passed before he called. I watched the phone ring until it stopped, then deleted the voicemail without listening. The silence was beginning to bother him, exactly as I'd expected. For years, I had always been there whenever they needed me. Whether it was money, childcare, fixing something around the house, or simply making life easier, I never said no. Now that support had disappeared, and they were starting to notice the empty space I'd left behind. A month later, there was a knock on my front door. I opened it and barely recognized my own son. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Dad," he said quietly, "can I come in?" I stepped aside without saying a word. He walked into the same living room where he'd grown up, slowly looking around at the worn furniture and the old family photographs hanging on the walls, as though he were seeing them for the very first time. Mark stood in front of the old fireplace, nervously rubbing his hands together before finally breaking the silence. "Dad, what's going on? Why haven't you answered any of my calls?" I looked at him without moving. "Why are you here, Mark?" My voice stayed calm, but it wasn't the calm of forgiveness. It was the calm of someone who had already made up his mind. He let out a long breath. "We need your help." I nodded slowly. "What kind of help?" He looked down at the floor. "I lost my job 3 weeks ago. The debt is out of control. We can't keep up with the mortgage or the credit cards anymore. The bank is talking about foreclosure. Sarah's falling apart, and we don't know what else to do. He finally looked me in the eye. Dad, we need money, just until I get back on my feet. I couldn't help but smile, though there wasn't an ounce of humor in it. The same son who had charged his own father $50 for a visit was now standing in my living room asking for thousands. I walked to the window and stared out at the quiet street. Mark, I said, do you remember the last time I came to your house? Yeah. Do you remember what I gave your wife? He frowned, confused for only a second before the answer hit him. His shoulders dropped. Dad. $50, I said. Cash. The admission fee for seeing my own grandchildren. He shut his eyes. He remembered. He had always remembered. Dad, it wasn't like that. I turned to face him. Wasn't it? For an entire year, I handed over money every time I wanted to hug Lily and Ethan, and you stood there watching it happen. You never stopped her. You never stopped yourself. He swallowed hard. I was trying to keep the peace. No, I said quietly. You were protecting your comfort. The words landed harder than if I had shouted them. You knew it was wrong, but saying nothing was easier than standing up for your father. His eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry. We were both wrong. Sarah was wrong. I was wrong. Please, Dad. I shook my head. You still don't understand. It was never about $50. The money wasn't what broke me. It was realizing my own son believed I had to earn the right to be part of his family. He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him interrupt. Every time I paid, you were telling me my love had a price. That being your father meant less than keeping your wife happy. That's what I'll never forget. His voice cracked. We're going to lose the house. Lily and Ethan keep asking where you are. We can fix this. We can be a family again. The word family echoed through the room, but it didn't feel the way it used to. Once, it meant unconditional love. Now it sounded like a bargaining chip. I looked him straight in the eyes. Mark, I want you to leave. His face turned pale. What? You heard me. He took a desperate step forward. Dad, please. No, I said, my voice firmer than it had been in years. Now you know exactly how it feels to have someone you love standing on the other side of a door and refusing to let you in. I paid to see my own grandchildren, I said, holding his gaze. Tell me, Mark, what kind of son makes his own father pay for love? The room fell silent. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Tears rolled down his face as he whispered, What can I do? Tell me how to make this right. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small leather notebook. First, I want my money back. He stared at me in disbelief. What? Every $50 I ever handed over. Every single payment. His face drained of color. Dad, we don't have it anymore. I told you we're broke. I slowly opened the notebook. I've written down every visit, every date, every dollar. I keep records of everything. I turned it toward him. Now I want to see the cash. His shoulders collapsed. He couldn't do it. We both knew that money had disappeared long ago, probably swallowed by another unnecessary purchase or another bill they had chosen over basic decency. We needed it, he said weakly. Groceries. Things for the kids. I shook my head. I don't care where it went. It was never yours to spend. Then I closed the notebook and looked him straight in the eye. The money matters a lot less than what it represents. I don't need another apology filled with excuses. I need you to prove that you finally remember how to treat me like your father instead of a customer. He nodded through his tears. I'll find a way. Then find one, I replied. And if Sarah expects a single dollar of help from me, she can come here herself. No phone call, no text message. She'll stand in this house, look me in the eyes, and explain exactly why what she did was wrong. I watched the fear spread across his face. Asking him to confront Sarah was harder than asking him for money, but I was finished protecting people who had never protected me. He left without another word. I honestly believed that would be the last time I saw either of them. But desperation has a way of changing people. 2 evenings later, someone knocked on my door again. This time Mark wasn't alone. Sarah stood beside him, almost unrecognizable. Her designer clothes were gone, replaced by an oversized sweater and worn sweatpants. Her makeup had disappeared, and her swollen, red eyes made it obvious she hadn't slept. She looked less like the woman who had once collected $50 bills from me, and more like someone carrying the full weight of her choices. "Mr. Miller," she said quietly, barely able to meet my eyes. "May we come in?" I stepped aside. They walked into the living room and stood there without saying a word. Sarah held a thick envelope against her chest with both hands. After several long seconds, she finally held it out to me. "This belongs to you," she whispered. "Every dollar." I looked at the envelope but didn't take it right away. "Where did you get it?" Her voice trembled. "I pawned my jewelry, my engagement ring, and my grandmother's necklace." Mark turned toward her in shock. "Sarah, why would you do that?" She slowly shook her head. "Because he's right." Tears streamed down her face. "What we did was cruel. I cared more about appearances than people. I treated him like an inconvenience, like a source of spending money, instead of the man who raised you and loved our children more than anything." Only then did I accept the envelope. It felt heavy in my hands, but not nearly as heavy as the silence filling the room. I looked at Sarah for a long moment before asking the only question that still mattered. "Why?" She finally broke. "Because I was ashamed of where I came from," she sobbed. "I grew up with nothing, and I became obsessed with proving I'd made it. I thought a bigger house, nicer cars, expensive renovations, all of it would make me worth something. I looked down on you because you lived simply. I convinced myself you weren't our equal." She covered her face and cried harder. "I couldn't have been more wrong. You were the only genuine person in this family, and I was too blind to see it." Sarah broke down completely. The polished, confident woman I had known was gone. She cried without holding anything back while Mark stood beside her, wiping away his own tears. I picked up the envelope and slowly opened it. Inside were neat stacks of $50 bills. I counted them one by one. Every dollar was there. I looked from the money to the two people standing in front of me, both exhausted, terrified, and finally stripped of their pride. Then I reached for the box of matches on the mantel. Neither of them understood what I was about to do. I struck a match, held the flame against the corner of the envelope, and watched it catch fire. "Dad!" Mark shouted as Sarah gasped in horror. Without saying a word, I dropped the burning envelope into the fireplace. Within seconds, the flames swallowed every bill, until nothing remained but black ash. The room fell silent. "I never wanted the money," I said, watching the fire die down. "I wanted you to understand what it feels like when love becomes a transaction. I wanted you to know what it's like to stand in front of someone you love and be told your place has a price." Neither of them could speak. Their eyes stayed fixed on the ashes. "You spent so much time chasing expensive things that you forgot the people who gave you everything for free. A bigger kitchen, a luxury car. None of that was ever going to save your family. All it did was convince you that possessions mattered more than people." Then I turned to Mark. "Do you remember when we could barely afford groceries? There were nights we split one sandwich because that's all we had. I never kept score. I never asked you to pay me back. That's what parents do." He dropped to his knees, his shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry, Dad. I was weak. I kept choosing the easy path because I was afraid of upsetting Sarah, and somewhere along the way, I stopped being the son you raised." I rested my hand on his shoulder. "You can earn your way back, but understand this. Unconditional love doesn't mean unconditional permission to hurt people." Then I faced Sarah. "Lily and Ethan don't need granite countertops or luxury cars. They need parents who teach them kindness, gratitude, and respect. That's the inheritance they'll remember." She nodded through tears. "I promise I'll change." "I believe you want to," I replied. "But trust isn't rebuilt with promises. It's rebuilt one decision at a time." That night became the turning point for all of us. I agreed to help them, but this time everything would happen on my terms. I kept my own house, but moved into the basement apartment at theirs so I could be close to the kids while helping Mark and Sarah rebuild their lives. Together we created a strict budget, canceled every unnecessary expense, and cut up the credit cards that had nearly destroyed them. I helped Mark find steady work again, and instead of chasing appearances, I encouraged Sarah to start the small business she'd always dreamed about so she could build confidence through honest work instead of expensive purchases. I even sold my old pickup and bought a used minivan because it made more sense for taking Lily and Ethan to school, the park, and soccer practice. The BMW disappeared too, replaced by a reliable used sedan. It wasn't meant to embarrass them. It was a daily reminder that real wealth begins with humility. As for the $40,000 kitchen, I didn't tear it apart. We repainted the cabinets, replaced the luxury finishes with simple butcher block counters, and turned it into a place where the family actually gathered instead of a room designed to impress strangers. Every Saturday morning, Lily and Ethan stood on little stools beside me making pancakes, covering the counters with flour and laughter. In the end, I wasn't trying to punish my son and his wife. I was teaching them something they should have known all along. A family is built around the table, not the price tag attached to it. Little by little, they began to understand. Love isn't measured by what you buy. It's measured by the moments you create together. Looking back, I realized my revenge was never about tearing my son and his wife down. It was about rebuilding them into the family we should have been all along. I watched Mark slowly stop measuring himself by his paycheck and start measuring himself by the husband, father, and son he had become. I watched Sarah let go of the need to impress strangers and finally appreciate the people who had been standing beside her from the beginning. She no longer treated me like an inconvenience. She treated me like family. 2 years have passed since the day that envelope turned to ash, and our lives barely resemble what they were before. Mark has become a man I'm proud to call my son again. Not because he earns more money, but because he finally learned to stand for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. Sarah and I built something I never imagined we could have: real trust. She asks for my advice before making big decisions, values my opinion, and even laughs when I insist on planting sunflowers in the garden every spring. Years ago, she would have rolled her eyes. Now she saves the best spot in the yard for them. As for Lily and Ethan, they never knew about the $50 rule or the envelope that burned in the fireplace. They only know that Grandpa is always there. I pick them up after school, cheer at every soccer game, spoil them with ice cream, and spend weekends making pancakes in the kitchen that once symbolized everything that was wrong with our family. Funny enough, it's now the room that brought us back together. When I think about the day I set that envelope on fire, I don't remember burning money. I remember burning humiliation, resentment, and the belief that love could ever be bought or sold. That fire didn't destroy my family. It gave us a chance to build a better one. The greatest victory wasn't making them suffer the way I had suffered. It was watching them become people my wife would have been proud of. They learned that respect can't be demanded, only earned. And I learned that forgiveness isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest thing a father can give. Even now, whenever I walk into that kitchen, I don't see $40,000 worth of cabinets anymore. I see pancake batter on the counters, finger paintings hanging on the refrigerator, and 2 grandchildren racing toward me with smiles that don't cost a single penny. That's when I know the richest man in that house isn't the one with the nicest kitchen. It's the grandfather who almost lost his family and found a way to bring them home again. In the end, that's what being a father has always meant to me.